What if the golden domes of Istanbul whispered secrets no historian dares to repeat? Behind the glittering grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, with its soaring minarets, lush gardens and flowing silks, there was another world, one rarely spoken of, often overlooked and nearly forgotten by history. It was a world filled with both wonder and sorrow, where young boys, some barely older than children, were taken from obscurity and transformed into symbols of beauty, elegance, and elite desire. These boys weren't soldiers defending borders. They weren't servants waiting on royal whims. They were called Yamaks, male concubines, whose lives were shaped by the strange blend of admiration and control that ruled the imperial court. They were trained to charm, to entertain, to represent refinement, and quietly to satisfy desires that few dared to speak of publicly. Their existence was complicated. On one hand, they lived among the empire's elite, surrounded by luxury, art, and education. But on the other, they were never truly free. Every smile could hide pressure, every silk robe could be a kind of cage. This isn't just a juicy detail tucked away in the footnotes of history. It's a deeply human story, one about affection, complicated by power, beauty used as currency, and the fragile place of those caught between status and subjugation. It reminds us that even in the most glittering corners of the past, there were people whose lives were shaped by forces they couldn't control, yet who still found ways to endure, to matter, and sometimes to love. When we think of the word harem, images of veiled women lounging in marble chambers might come to mind. But this is only half the story. Across Persia, ancient Greece, imperial China, and yes, even in the mighty Ottoman Empire, men and boys were also desired. They were cherished, not merely for companionship, but for their appearance, grace, and what they could offer in private. In the heart of the Topkapi Palace, there existed a hidden society, a gilded cage filled with hand-picked boys from across the empire. Some came from poor families seeking fortune, others were captives from conquered territories. But once inside, they were no longer children. They were ornaments of status, living luxuries. They were trained in music, poetry, politics, calligraphy, and the unspoken rules of seduction. They were taught to charm, to please, to perform. According to Venetian diplomat Benedetto Ramberti, up to 500 boys, aged between 8 and 20, were housed within the palace walls. They were not hidden in shame. No, they were celebrated. Their very presence was a statement of elite taste and masculine sophistication. But don't mistake admiration for safety. Behind every silk curtain was surveillance. Behind every gesture of affection was the weight of control. These boys were commodities, and yet many of them were adored like gods until they aged out, lost their beauty, or worse, fell in love. Enter Tahir and Tib, two young Ottoman boys captured by Christian noblemen during a time of violent strife. You'd expect torture, chains, and torment, but something unexpected happened. Their captors fell in love. What began as conquest became compassion. They were lavished with gifts, treated not as spoils of war, but as companions, perhaps even equals. For a fleeting moment, love crossed religious lines, blurred the boundaries between conqueror and captive. But society was not ready for this truth. Neither Christian nor Muslim orthodoxy could tolerate it. Their love was branded as perversion. The punishment, shame, imprisonment, separation. Their story might have ended there, if not for what happened next. The Christian lovers, unwilling to let go, escaped prison and converted to Islam, just for the chance to be reunited. But even that desperate act could not turn back the tide of a world growing colder. The Ottomans didn't categorize sexuality as modern societies do. There was no rigid binary of gay or straight. Instead, roles were defined by dominance, the active and the passive. A man could love a man, so long as he retained his masculinity in action. In this world, beauty was currency, and the male form was celebrated. Sultans, viziers, and even elite Janissary soldiers kept male companions. Some Yamaks were granted tax exemptions, others received political appointments. Many were elevated from the dust of poverty into the fragrance of power. To outsiders it might have seemed like paradise. But what does it mean to live in a golden cage where love is both demanded and denied? It all began to unravel in the 18th and 19th centuries. The Ottomans opened their gates to Western diplomacy, but with science, railways and gunpowder came something far more insidious: Western morality. A new lens through which love, gender and desire were judged. Then came 1858. The Ottoman Penal Code was introduced. Suddenly, the love that had once adorned palaces was now criminal. Acts against public modesty were punishable by imprisonment and fines. In Istanbul, men suspected of same-sex affection were hunted, beaten in the streets, shaved bald in shame, and in some cases, sexually assaulted. Public affection between men became taboo. The age of tolerance collapsed under the weight of imported shame. The male beloved, once a star in Ottoman society, vanished into the shadows. As the empire shifted toward Western values and strict legal codes, the once celebrated love between men, especially in the form of the Yamaks, faded into silence. The poems stopped, the portraits disappeared, the stories, once shared in courtly whispers and sung in songs, were buried beneath layers of shame and denial. The male beloved, who had once held a place of honor in the empire's cultural imagination, was pushed into obscurity. Not just physically erased, but emotionally and historically abandoned. Ottoman writer Ahmed Cevdet Pasha observed with sorrow, "Woman lovers have increased, while boy beloveds have disappeared. It is as if the people of Lot have been swallowed by the earth." And just like that, an entire era vanished. But history always leaves a trail. But not everyone let history decide the ending. Tahir and Tib, whose love began in captivity and blossomed against all odds, refused to surrender to silence. When their Christian captors were imprisoned for their affections, the two Ottoman youths waited, and when their lovers broke free, they did the unthinkable. They converted to Islam, not for salvation, not for power, but for love. It was a desperate, hopeful gesture, an attempt to outrun a world closing in around them. Their act wasn't just about reunion, it was rebellion, a refusal to let politics, religion, or social norms dictate who they could hold dear. They knew the risks, they defied them anyway. Because even as empires rose and fell, even as laws hardened and hearts closed, love, true, defiant love, still found a way. The story of the Ottoman male concubine is not simply one of decadence or moral collapse. It is the story of how societies define love and how those definitions can be both liberating and lethal. These boys were not merely victims. They were survivors of a world that adored them and destroyed them. Their memories echo in forgotten corridors, in poems unsung, in shadows cast by domes and towers. We remember them now, not as curiosities, but as humans caught in the crossfire of history. So, was this hidden world a symbol of sophistication or a tragedy wrapped in silk? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more forbidden truths from history's darkest chapters, like, subscribe and keep digging with us, because the past is never really gone. It's just waiting to be unburied.